one of the most poignant and powerful and necessary questions that Jesus asks in the New Testament is the same question that he's getting ready to ask you today. Because in Luke chapter 9, in verse 18 and 19 and 20, he looks at his disciples and he says, "Who do you say that I am?" It's a necessary question for you to consider, because most often we have this tendency where we put God in a box that matches up with our experience, or it matches up with the denomination we grew up in, or it matches up with the traditions of our family line, where we've come from, what our mama and grandmama and them said that Jesus was. Maybe what the culture around you is declaring that Jesus is, but Jesus asked the 12 disciples in the New Testament, y'all, and he asks us today so that we can consider for ourselves, who do you say that Jesus is? The reason why this question is going to be so important in Luke chapter 9 for these 12 disciples that are following closely with Jesus, the reason why it's going to matter so much is because in verse 23 of Luke chapter 9, he is about to give them one of the most stunning and staggering invitations that they will ever receive, that we will ever receive. He's going to invite them to be disciples. They're already believers, but he's getting ready to invite them to surrender all. And here's what he's going to say to them in Luke chapter 9, verse 23. If anyone wishes to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever wishes to gain his life is actually going to have to lose it. And whoever is going to find his life is going to lose it for my sake. For what does it profit a man who gains the whole wide world but loses his soul? He's going to offer an invitation to discipleship to these 12. But before the invitation, he asks them a question about his identity. Identity first, invitation later. Because think about the gravity and the weightiness of the descriptive words that Jesus uses to describe discipleship here. He says things like deny, cross, lose, follow me. Y'all, think of how sobering these terms actually are, that remind us that actually surrendering all, actually being the kind of disciple that Jesus describes here, it really does require and necessitate a solid divorce from much of what society and even the Christian culture has begun to purport and promote that following Jesus actually looks like. It flies in the face of a self-focused faith that celebrates excess and hustle and a life of ease and comfort as being the mark of what divine favor is on somebody's life. It's going to demand that we reorient the compass of all our religious activity back in the direction of virtues that have been lost, like simplicity and discipline and obedience and holiness and the restraint that the Spirit of God develops within us. It reminds us that we're going to have to recalibrate and reckon with what it actually means to surrender all, to follow Jesus fully and completely. Because y'all, there are many people who have placed faith in him, but there are much fewer who have actually decided to follow him, to walk in step with him. And the question we've got to ask ourselves honestly and truthfully is, will we pursue and surrender to this discipleship, Christ's definition of discipleship? Or are we actually going to create our own definition that coddles our flesh and esteems this earth more highly than the kingdom of heaven? But no, on this occasion right here, when Jesus describes what it means to surrender all, he cuts the legs out from underneath the modernized, politicized, cliche version of discipleship that we've seen bubbling up to the surface, and he defines what it actually means to follow him, to live in step with him, to walk with him, to surrender to him. He makes it plain and clear on this day that it looks more like selflessness than it does selfishness. It actually requires that with our lives, with our futures. It means that we're more interested in being marked by the Holy Spirit than marketing ourselves. That we trust Him and surrender all to Him. And for that kind of invitation, like to really be willing to surrender all, we gonna have to know who Jesus is. Because why would we surrender our lives to somebody who's just a good teacher? Why would we surrender to somebody unless we actually believe that He is who He said He is? That He actually did redeem us, that He actually did pay a debt that we could not pay on our own, that apart from the gracious gift of salvation, we would be separated from God for eternity and find ourselves in the pit of hell. If we really don't believe it, then we won't actually follow Him and surrender all. So He deals with His identity first before the invitation. Our willingness to surrender fully and completely to Him demands that we ask ourselves the question, who do we say Jesus is?